We are almost done with the lesson. We've talked through some very procedural reasons that our industry might care about sustainability. We've looked at how the industry has adopted and embraced sustainability, including the formation of these alliances to work together on it and the creation of new positions to take it on. And we've gotten a real sneak peek at the tools necessary to embark on our sustainability journey. Now, to conclude the lesson, I want to send it over to Mike Lally, Director of Park Operations at Disneyland Resort. It's going to help us contextualize sustainability in this moment we're living in right now and give us three important ways we can emotionally connect to and examine why we might care about and, in fact, why we need to care about sustainability. So, with that, over to you, Mike.
Thanks for having me. I'm really humbled and I would say borderline insecure about my presentation today. This has always been sustainability has really been a true passion of mine. I have, as I know probably many of us do, parents, family, friends to thank for that from a young age. But I'm extremely lucky to get to work with an expert team here that I'm sure I learn from more every day than they learn from me. But I spent some time really trying to think about what can I add of value to this group of industry professionals that on most of these detailed science-based topics are just going to be smarter than me. But I think what I wanted to start with was what I'm pretty confident we all have in common right now, which is particularly over the last 14 months, we've all had moments, some of them may be short, some of them may be very, very long, where we felt like we were on losing streaks. And that last year plus of a losing streak can really begin to set in to the point that it can be hard to even know or remember what it feels like to be winning or to feel like you're on the right path or to feel like everything's kind of okay in my life. I will say that, the loss of the last years hit every person around the world. Some are really privileged to have only lost, family Christmas gatherings or wedding receptions or vacations and concert tickets. And obviously we know others have lost their jobs and so much more. So I know that's a sobering start to a Thursday morning, so I apologize for that, but I think I'd feel remiss and probably less than authentic to not acknowledge it off the bat. But with that said, losing streaks take a lot of form, and I'll tell you just really quickly, they're not always a shared experience. I think that's what's really unique about COVID-19 and the moment that we feel like we are in right now in the world. I grew up in Boston, and as a huge Boston sports fan, which doesn't do me any favors in the Southern California area on balance, but I will say, I'm 43 now, and in my childhood, it was more the 80s and 90s, and our sports team were on brutal losing streaks. The Celtics were great, and that was about it, and they often still managed to lose to the Lakers, much to my chagrin and the joy, I'm sure, of many in this panel today. But I still remember, even in the midst of that, getting snuck into the Boston Garden by my uncle to watch the Celtics beat the Lakers in a finals game, and they ended up losing the series, but I remember that part less, and I remember the moment more, and I think that to me, it's a really good story of there's still small wins to be had, even in the darkest times. And as the teams I was the biggest fan of were the Red Sox and Patriots at the time, where there's full blown punchlines more than powerhouses, and little fundamentals always seemed to matter and always seemed to catch us off guard. And then when I moved in the late 90s to Disney, I would say Disney also was a company that was on a bit of a losing streak. They had a great turnaround in the 80s from Michael Eisner, was on this incredible run, and then started into this tricky moment with investor frustration and a Save Disney campaign waged by one of the co-founders' sons, and a string of disappointing offers with films and new theme park openings that were just a struggle. So losing streaks happen. And I show those two examples just as a grounding to say, they can be very private and personal losing streaks that no one else really knows. I think the amount of Tuesday and Thursday nights I spent shifting where I was sitting on the couch to see if that might help the Bruins goalies' reflexes better. But people certainly, the green mail of Disney in the early 80s or the Save Disney campaign in the 2000s, this is just a public company going through a public fight on Wall Street. So what I do think is unique is having something that is a 14-month public losing streak that the world feels together at the same time. And what we know for sure is there are going to be legendary comebacks. There are going to be literally thousands of them. And I bet millions that we won't know that are personal, that are those small moments. Some of mine are embarrassing to admit, of like, I finally just got over cable and cord cut and went a little bit more full minimalist broadly. That was kind of the gateway drug to me towards trying to wean myself off of more what would probably be seen as broad consumerism, and just focusing on the family and the house. And, when the world shrunk, I think it also helped really crystallize what was important to each of us. And that's going to be really important moving forward, I think, for us personally and professionally, about how do we hold on to that while also taking the next forward with, as the world opens up, how can we influence that? So I wanted to spend some time thinking about, when we look back at what these legendary comebacks will be, they will feel inevitable. We're going to look back the same way people do right now, and they say, oh, I should have known about Apple stock then, or Google stock, or Amazon. But they don't right now. It's a time of chaos. It is a time that people don't know what to do. And it feels like there's nothing more scientific than like just betting on red or black on a roulette wheel of what should our next step be. So I wanted to share a little bit of, at Disneyland, how we're thinking about this moment is really through three filters. Who have we been? Who are we right now? And I would use that language specifically, not like who are we or who are we today? Who are we right now? Who are we on the day before we reopen? And who do we need to be? And I think that need is important too. It's not who we want to be, or where do we want to go, or where do we aspire to be? Who do we absolutely have to be to have our role in the dialogue, in the world transformation that's to come, that we want to have as people? And I don't even speak to this as like a corporate behemoth that I know Disney can seem to be sometimes, but I can tell you it's an assembly of people no different than any other group I've worked with, whether it was, clubs in high school and college or different companies. It's a group of people that are trying to do the right things as best they can. And there are very, very few geniuses here, just like there are everywhere else. It's a lot of people trying to go through the right thing. So who have we been? Who are we right now? And who do we need to be? And I know that Disney's history is a story kind of well told and can almost feel cliched at times. So I won't belabor that point too well, but I do want to ground in just saying, whether it's business, social policy, personal self-actualization, there are always learnings to be had in our past. And I do think it has to be a deliberate effort to spend time interrogating our past and saying, what was it that captured my imagination and made me want to be a part of working here, or be a part, or ask my wife out on a date for the first time, or made me really want to decide to have kids? What was it that really made that something that I opted into and thought, this is a core part of what is important to me and where I'm going to invest all of my time and energy? And then what are the early wins? I think for the most part, in most of these situations, especially as we think about sustainability, what are those early, often very small wins that emboldened us and almost, got that addiction going, that made us say, oh, I'm going to dedicate even more time and energy. I bet if I could get, if we could get rid of something as small and simple as plastic straws, I bet there's bigger stuff we can do next month if we spent more time and effort trying to change some hearts and minds on it. So Disney's history certainly goes back to our founder, which is helpful. I know it sounds cheesy, but it does go back to Walt Disney deciding, from 1948 to 1960, those True Life Adventure is kind of a way before its time series of nature documentary films. In a time that documentaries are really having a renaissance in a Netflix era, that was not where the big dollars were to be made in the 40s and 50s, was nature docs. But that, I think, gave him the opportunity to then go into the 50s and say, I'm going to be the chair National Wildlife Week. Again, decades before Earth Day was a thing. And that's a very different choice. So I think what I took from that when we first started on this journey here at Disneyland Resort was, we're best at telling stories. That's what we're best at as a company. We're best at connecting to the heart. And people can be inspired by real life just as much as by fantasy. And of course, you can't just decide, I'm going to speak at a Sustain SoCal convention, or I'm going to chair Wildlife Week and make some charitable donations to get some positive PR. That's not good enough. You have to really live it and sit in it and have the curiosity to learn as much about it as possible. And I think that that's something that I know I'm preaching to the choir, this group understands. But I think as I spend time going out across our company, there are more people here that know, the Disney heritage around Disneyland, and don't necessarily equate it to other things that were passion points from our company's inception. And we have to spend some real time and effort making sure that internally we're solvent there, and everybody understands that this isn't something that is a progressive agenda. This is something that has been core to what it means to live in this country and be a citizen of the planet and be a part of what the vision was for the group that works here for a century now. who are we now is it's a difficult moment because we're going to find out a lot about this, 24 hours from now when the gates reopen tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. But what I can say is about the last decade, 2009 was really the starting point, which is for a true environmental vision for us on setting internal goals. And that gave us a bit of a new charter that is we have to keep reexamining our approach every year, but having some more long-term focuses, realizing that the tactics of the day-to-day or the week-to-week aren't good enough. We have to really focus on our three big focuses have been renewable energy, waste reduction, water conservation. They've been the major focuses since then. And they continue to be key metrics for us as we set public goals. But I will say internally, that's not the storytelling that changes behavior that we've seen with people that work here or with people that come here on vacation. There still is that importance of sharing real life with people and understanding the cause and effect. I still think that we set our long-term goals for 2020, for example, and we're extremely proud that we met them and exceeded them in several areas. But we also had to keep learning and frankly state that, we've got to move our own goalposts. We just released our fairly ambitious 2030 goals, but it was clear after 2020 that the progress we'd made was good enough by our own report card, but not nearly good enough to avoid the worst possible outcomes for the planet. And especially knowing the role that we can play in this dialogue, both in the local community and at the national and global level, that we had to really make some aspirational choices and kind of do that old, we're going to throw our hat over the fence and we don't know how we're going to get it back, but we know we have to. And I think that kind of does pivot to, those 2030 goals are still very similar, and they're 5 key points that I know this group knows really well of, in general, right? We're in touch of the greenhouse gas emissions, wastewater, materials, building design. And I think some of that pivot, is just trying to go further up the supply chain and realize how can we be smarter about this before we're asking the frontline employees or the frontline consumers to make choices for themselves. We have to make it easy for them. And we have to spend the bigger money up front to create the infrastructure that really transforms how people think about businesses. And we haven't been shy about looking at, what are these large other corporations doing at their corporate campuses that are zero waste? And how do we best practice off that and realize that even in a large scale consumer-based business, there's still no excuse to not finding a way to skinny down and realizing that we have to grow our partnerships in areas that might have been controversial before. I saw one of those great ads last night of, Coke, Pepsi, a couple other companies doing that joint advertising about finally getting to, the right level of recyclable plastics. And that's not something I would have imagined seeing in the 80s in the peak cola wars of, those companies linking arms and saying, we're all going to do the right thing. But I'd be surprised if it, I believe there's some real good intent there, but I also believe there's some understanding of the risk of extinction. If we don't all figure out a better way to do this, people are going to slowly but surely wean themselves off of something that they feel like is the wrong thing to do for the planet. So in the midst of a lot of positive movement, where we are today is better than we were, but not nearly good enough. And that's, I think, where the 2030 goals came in for us. But when we talk about that third horizon of where we need to be, Disneyland is closed and we've dealt with some stark realities over the last year, but after a bit of time, the real opportunity I think we found was in interconnectedness. This is something I don't think it can be overstated that the world experienced together and it transformed society. And it was something that, science has been in the news on a daily basis in a way that I haven't seen in my lifetime. And while, that could also have been polarizing for some, especially in a general election year, I honestly believe the net result is going to be the reemergence of science mattering to people around the world. Not only has it been a fixture every day, people have felt the real life cause and effect of how ignoring science impacts their day-to-day lives in a way that I think is extremely uncommon for us. And so many have been living with this reality in silos for so long. You obviously, there's the most public aware cases of like Flint, Michigan, or there's plenty of people that have dealt with this, but not at the scale and not penetrating every income level, every city, every state, every country, to really understand that when we all learn and see how science evolves and how we need to adapt to it, if we refuse to do that, life fundamentally changes and we end up in a situation that we used to think, certainly in this country, we used to think was reserved for countries where the air quality was terrible. Okay, they wear masks there, but that never happened here. And when you see it spread so quickly, I know we've seen just inside the Disneyland team here a lot more passion around what do we need to do that gets us 3 steps ahead, because we need to make sure that we are well ahead of the field, because we have this true responsibility. And the fact that, Bob Iger said it really well over a year and a half ago, of people aren't going to come to theme parks if they can't breathe the air. You can go to the stark business reality of it if you need to. People aren't going to come here if they feel like the net impact of their experience here is negative to the environment and for their children. And we've been, I think, wanting that to be the message and what people feel emotionally for decades. And I think that this is an interesting 14 months where you really see the real life examples that it's no longer fantasy. It's inspiring people, hopefully, through some really tough stories of real life. That is what those old nature documentaries taught us. And it's the reality of, sometimes you learn. And I know I have 2 daughters, and I tell them, occasionally there is, it is survival of the fittest in this world. It is dog eat dog. And those kind of analogies, circle right back to when you see the real life of those nature documentaries that doesn't go well for everybody. And you see the polar bears on the melting icebergs. And it takes all of us together to make sure that there isn't a runt of the litter left behind. And it takes, I think, a really tough landscape to figure out that we have to have a pathway towards better behavior. So the global reset's happening. People are, obviously over the last year, changing their vocabularies, adjusting their habits, learning how to live with new burdens, but also learning how to evolve beyond them. So I think those 3 elements to us are what we've most internalized. Who have we been? Where are we right now? Who do we need to be? They're big questions, and the answers are probably different for every person and for every company and for every social group. But I think what we've found is they need to be really carefully considered. They have to be interrogated and cross-examined. You have to have both kind of true believers and devil's advocates in the discussion. And everybody in the world right now is exhausted, and they're tired of riding out an extremely long losing streak. I think we're all seeing the glimpse and the light at the end of the tunnel coming. I think there's, a real appetite for that. And we know that people are ready to jump back in as soon as they feel safe enough to do so. And that's going to be a gradient experience for everybody. I'm not entirely convinced my mother is ever going to stop wearing a mask. It didn't really bother her that much. I think it's become a security blanket to her. And that's a choice. And that's, I think you're going to see people learn to live with it. And you've already seen people, right, that make it their public choice to never wear it because that's part of their self-identity. And we have to figure out, before we can try to change hearts and minds of people, how do we understand our own stories? Where have we been, flaws and all? We all, when you really do the full MRI and CAT scan of our histories and of our company's histories, there are learnings to be had, and key wins to extract, and important losses to reconcile and understand where was the flawed thinking and what needs to be learned there. We have to know where we are today in real life. I mean, it was, more internal probably than an external story, but there was a huge evolution of, I started in this company in 1998, and the Disney look was something that was a huge part of the culture. You had to not have facial hair. You had to not have visible tattoos. You had to have, very subdued, natural looking fingernail polish, hair color, all those things. And it slowly evolved through the years, but probably about 2 weeks ago, there was a major change to basically say, no, visible tattoos are going to be okay. I think it's pretty much everywhere except on the face and neck. And all hair colors are going to be welcomed. And the gender assignments of cast member costumes are going to go away. Those are areas that aren't really in sustainability discussion, but I will say took a lot of interrogating and reconciling with our heritage to understand, why did we make this choice in 1955? How has it evolved since then? Is it still relevant today? And is it taking us where we need to be? And it's really hard to, I think, make those big choice changes because it's not a topic that 100% of people that work here agree with. But it is what I think leadership and vision looks like, which is putting us in the position to continue to lead and include people and welcome in new leaders and innovators, and showing that this is an imaginative, creative place that will evolve and won't become a museum. And that who we need to be, I think is the final step. And it's before we can ever start telling other people, what we think they need to do differently, or what we would ask them to do or think of differently. We have to know and have it at that kind of DNA granular level that it's who we are, to have the credibility to try to even engage in that conversation and to have more than press releases and individual tactics that we're proud of, but real strategies that sometimes that come at a cost, at a financial cost, and at an investment in time and energy cost, to know that we are unassailable in our beliefs and in the due diligence we've done to understand every point of view. I've had conversations with people that say, you know, why is recycling so important? My grandfather's first job was working at a lumber yard. And if all of a sudden they weren't cutting those trees down, we might not have had food on the table. That's a voice that needs to be heard and understood before you can begin to move forward. And it can sound very ignorant in some circles, but it also is how you end up, I think, in a place that can be very divisive quickly without us even realizing it. And you end up stepping on landmines that you didn't even know were there. So we have to really believe and understand our story, know the counterpoints inherently, and acknowledge them and seek to solve them before we can ever try to tell this story to other people and connect to their hearts. I think that that's what we've seen. The science, the data that we've seen over the last year plus is compelling and interesting to many people. But it also doesn't resonate with some people. Some people are very good left brain analytic thinkers. They can see percentage points and it makes sense to them. Some people, you need to find the way to their heart and telling stories differently to help influence change. So I apologize for going a little bit left of center of straight sustainability. I wanted to reconcile personally, my strengths and weaknesses here are not going to be going through the detail of the tactics as much as how we're trying to work both internally and externally to figure out where do we have vulnerabilities, where do we need to shore up our own stories, where do we need to learn within our own team how to better combat ignorance, educate in ways that are understanding and empathetic and non-judgmental, and tell stories with data to the person that needs to understand data, and tell stories with heart and conviction and specific real life examples to people that will be compelled that way. Because one of my first jobs here was being a trainer in custodial at the Disney MGM studios at the time. And I remember the person who was training me to be a trainer, they said, you know, some of the trainers here will tell you this is how they train. They're matter of fact, right between the eyes. And if somebody can't take it, they don't belong at Disney. And if they can take it, they're our kind of stock. And a different person will tell you, you know, well, I'm kind of a softie. I kind of let people get away with some stuff, but I'm a good guy. And I want to, and the person who taught me to be a trainer said, that's all garbage. The person who's a good trainer has all the tools. They're going to learn who they're training, understand how to best connect with them, and adjust their style to communicate what they need to do and the way they need to best understand it. And, you know, that was somebody that was a custodial cast member that had worked there for 30 years. And that is probably some of the best leadership advice I've ever received, which is just understanding that the way you think and your friends think and people you spend most of your time with is unique to your group and is not necessarily going to expand the influence of your group. It's so important, you know, to get back to that like Lincoln team of rivals concept. And I think it's even where the world is today, it doesn't necessarily seem that way watching the news, but I really believe it is the best opportunity we've had to engage in dialogue on something like sustainability that is rooted in science, but has real life, heart-based, compelling stories to be told around it that can help evolve how people behave and how people think and how they teach their kids to behave and think. So thank you again for the time and the privilege of getting to, you know, speak to and obviously listen and learn from this group throughout the day. And I truly cannot wait to see each of you at Disneyland.